Welcome to Heavy Networking, coming to you this week once again from the AutoCon 1 event held in Amsterdam in May 2024. I'm your host, Ethan Banks. You can find me on LinkedIn or the Packet Pushers community Slack group, which you can join for free at packetpushers.net/community. Among the heaviest topics we get into on this podcast are standards. Standards such as those published by the IEEE and IETF. Those are the documents agreed to by industry participants that govern protocols and best practices. If you're any sort of student of networking, you're going to be familiar with Request for Comments, RFC documents defining routing protocols like OSPF and BGP, as well as many other protocols the world uses daily like HTTP and SMTP. RFCs are artifacts created by the Internet Engineering Task Force, or again, IETF. The IETF produces many documents each year, not just RFCs. Drafts are also created by working groups in a variety of technical areas, and those drafts might become RFCs someday, or they might not. That's part of what the IETF working groups help figure out. The first ever Network Management Operations, or NMOP, working group meeting was held in Brisbane at the 119th meeting of the IETF in March 2024. Well, what's the NMOP group all about? Our guest today is Mahesh Jethanandani. He's going to help us figure that out, but I'm going to give you a hint. NMOP is tackling issues around network management protocols and techniques that could well impact network automation. Mahesh, welcome to Heavy Networking, and if you would introduce yourself to the people, tell us who you are and what you do.
All right, Ethan, thank you for all the work you have been doing to highlight the work that goes on in IETF. I believe you first visited IETF back in 2017. I got an email about IETF 98 that you were coming to.
Okay, yeah.
But I believe your work dates back even further, back to 2010.
Yeah, May 2010 was the first Packet Pushers podcast we ever released, yeah.
Excellent, right. So thank you for bringing awareness to the important work that IETF has been doing. And thanks for that introduction and laying some of the groundwork for what I and probably thousands of IETFers do in our standards body.
Yeah.
To your question, I wear multiple hats, and one of that hat is being the area director for management and operations area within IETF.
So when you say area director, that's like, if we think of the IETF, the way it's organized as a hierarchy, an area director has multiple working groups underneath it, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Right. So we have 7 areas within IETF, management and operations just being one of them. I'm one of the area directors. I look at the manageability piece of it, and I have a co-AD that is responsible for the operations piece of it.
So there's 2 of you sharing area director responsibilities. You've kind of split those out.
In that particular area. But we are kind of unique in that way. The other working areas have 2 or 3 area directors, all of them looking at the same thing.
Now, the area directors, you have a secret club, I suppose, that meets deep underground in a bunker and there's a handshake. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, but seriously, our meetings happen every 2 weeks. It's an open meeting. It's called a telechat session, where all the area directors meet to essentially approve the documents that have been proposed.
Now, you said open meeting, as in anybody like me. I could drop in and listen to these meetings?
As an observer, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you're not supposed to be participating in the meeting unless you're called upon.
Hey, Mahesh, you got something wrong, buddy.
No, right. But as an observer, and that's really, I point that out because that's an IETF ethic. It's part of how everything is done in the IETF is done in the open on some level or another.
Yes, absolutely. And if you think about it, our entire process, right from the beginning till the end, is a completely public and open to participation process.
Yes. Yes. Now, participation could be through mailing lists. I know is a very common one because people from all over the world, all different time zones are participating. And so, it's not all going to happen in real time. Mailing lists are a common way a lot of that work is done. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike some of the other standards bodies, we don't have to sit down in a big room with smoking cigars, probably, trying to wordsmith every word of the document. No, that's not how we do. We do actually a lot of work over email, and we propose changes, we approve changes all over email.
And then, but there still are in-person meetings with the IETF, 3 per year, I believe?
That is correct. 3 in a year, 1 in Asia, 1 in Europe, and 1 in North America.
Yeah. And what gets done in those in-person meetings is distinct from what happens in the mailing lists?
That is true. The whole idea of actually meeting in person is to enable collaboration, to enable the work that we do. It's very different when you have met somebody and talked to them in person than to collaborate entirely over email. It's just like going to work. Yeah. It's not the same. So we do have these meetings primarily to bring people together, to share ideas, and to work together. That is not to say that it supplements the work that goes on in the email, but definitely is an important part.
Yeah, in the few IETF meetings that I've attended, I would sit in the observer. Since I'm not active in any of the working groups, I didn't have anything to say, but was very interested in the proceedings and noticed that as the details of a draft were getting hashed out, different people would come up to the mic and would say their piece, and they had a perspective and a point of view, sometimes very strong points of view that would be articulated. The working group chairs would be up front, tended to moderate the discussion and have provide feedback or accept feedback as the case may be. And it felt like a lot was happening there that in real time, when you're in with other humans chatting, you get a lot of nuance that can be lost in an email. You kind of understand perspective and how people feel strongly and read intonation. And it's just a different thing.
It is. And I tell people that a lot is lost in an email, not from a specification perspective, but in the nuances of how you say something. It makes a difference whether you're doing it in person or over email.
Well, thank you for what you do in the IETF and what the IETF does. It's still a really important organization that affects networking, broadly, globally, every year. There's new stuff that comes out that matters to all of us. So let's drill into the NMOP working group. Give us the high-level overview of NMOP. Why was the group formed? What's the charter?
Okay. So we started by talking about, the hierarchy of IETF. So you have working groups that are focused on particular aspects of networking. And some of the documents that these working groups produce could be best current practices, or they could be informational documents that talk about deployment experience, or they could be proposed standards that are specifically talking about a particular protocol.
Yeah, and this is a good thing to point out. So the RFCs that come out, like you say, they could be BCPs, best current practices, giving you as an operator guidelines of what the industry, it's like you've surveyed the industry to find out what people are doing and kind of settled on, these are best current practices that give you a guideline. Yeah. Informational, as in it's not defining a protocol exactly. Right. It could, some informational ones do that, but it's not been accepted as a standard. It's like, here's something that we're doing and you could use this if you like.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of approach.
That's the whole idea, is that we try to put context to the standard that we are proposing, right? And that comes from operational deployment experience. And we document those in informational documents.
And then there's the actual standards where this is your framework, your guideline if you are writing a protocol. These are things you should do, things you must do, things we recommend you do. There's different verbiage that has different meanings. And then a programmer, developer could use that document as a basis for creating a protocol. And so in theory, anyone that that writes code that is compliant with that RFC standard, they should be able to interoperate.
Absolutely.
We're both smiling as we say that, but yes. Yeah.
So there is an RFC just that talks about the keywords that you use in a proposed standard. It's called RFC 2119, that says you shall use the words may, should, must, all in caps.
Yes.
To emphasize that this is how the implementers are expected to implement the protocol. And that's different from a lowercase must or a should, for example.
Okay, so back to NMOP. We keep going back to IETF stuff, but back to NMOP. Again, we're talking about why the group was formed. What's the charter?
Right. So the Network Management Operations or NMOP working group is different from other working groups in that sense, specifically in the management area. And I say it's different because it's more operator and user-centric.
as opposed to writing protocols, let's say.
Exactly. So rather than defining a protocol, its focus is to solicit input from users, such as network operators, to identify issues that they could be facing when deploying their solutions in the network. And they want to be able to discuss those problems with other people, other peers. So the NMOP working group think of it as a forum where operators can come with their problem set, and we would have other operators that they could discuss it with. Or they could actually discuss them directly with the people who define that protocol to say, yeah, here's a problem.
Oh, and as in, here's a management protocol I'm using, and I have this operational challenge using it, this practical problem.
Right.
Hey, I want to talk to the person who, one of the people who helped design the thing and express my challenge, and maybe revisions come out of it for the protocol.
Okay. Absolutely. And we do have revisions called BIS documents that come out of some of these discussions. But they don't have to be necessarily just that. It could be to investigate the cause of some of these operational issues. Maybe that would lead to some amount of change to the protocol. Or it could be to conduct small experiments, right, to quantify an issue. So NMOP is different in that sense because it doesn't define protocols, but it makes recommendations on how to solve a problem. And let me give you an example.
Okay.
Right? So one problem that operators have is about the inventory of the network equipment in there.
Always, yeah.
Operators want to know what is deployed in the network and where is it deployed and what is the state of that device, right? They want to be able to create and maintain this inventory almost dynamically. Imagine having to do this statically. So that itself is a hurdle.
I don't have to imagine it. I've done it. Yeah.
So
terrible.
NMOP as a working group would collect requirements like these, have a discussion around the particular ask, and then hand them over to another working group, like the network inventory YANG working group, or IV for short.
Yeah.
That'll take up the task of specifying an inventory collection model.
Okay.
So that's one of the things NMOP does. The other big area that NMOP is focused on is open source development. So, and when I say open source development, it's both of tools and libraries that enable deployment of protocols that IETF has specified. So, take telemetry as an example. Now, IETF has specified something called YANG push to push information out. And operators want to know what's going on in their network. But we lack open source tools and libraries for operators to pick up and implementers to pick up solutions on and implement them in the network devices. So NMOP is tasked to develop some of these tools and capabilities that will hopefully enable operators to deploy the solutions that IETF is specifying.
Oh, that's interesting about the code. Now, I'm aware that IETF has hackathons. Typically, that's a lead-off event before the working group meetings and so on happen, as I recall.
So that is true. 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, before the IETF meeting.
So would a hackathon be where some of this code is developed that you're talking about?
That's where certainly people will come together, but the work doesn't need to start and stop with the hackathon.
Of course, yeah.
So the idea is that NMOP wants to enable this as a slightly longer-term project to say, if I need a library or a tool, for example, to receive telemetry data, is there an open-source implementation of YANG push that I can use today?
This is interesting in that I don't think so. Rough consensus and running code, right? That's one of the IETF
our mantra for the day. Yes,
But I don't think of the IETF as a organization that produces code. I think of people that maybe work in the IETF that decide they want to build something as people that would do an individual project, or maybe a company that is interested in bringing this standard to life as someone that would make code, but not the IETF itself. Do you see the subtle distinction I'm making?
I do, and that's partly why I started by saying that NMOP working group is different.
Yeah.
Think of it as a practical side of defining a specification.
Huh.
Right? It's saying, IETF, you're great at specifying a protocol, but hey, I want to be able to use this. Tell me how are you enabling me in deploying a Yang push solution? So I'm not saying that IETF is chartered or the entire IETF is going to go and start now developing open source code for this.
But NMOP is.
But NMOP is going to look for participants in its working group to say, hey, would you be willing to do an open source implementation that might enable some of the work, right? So that's what they're looking for.
So historically, this isn't the first time that IETF has been involved in this. So the Internet Architecture Board, which they also meet at IETF meetings, but the IAB, RFC 3535, there was this desire to go out and reach into the community and gather a bunch of data from operators and perhaps make changes based on that. This feels like a reboot of that RFC 3535 on some level?
Yeah, so one of the drafts that you will see in the NMOP working group is actually something called an RFC 3535 BIS. And BIS is a revision of the original RFC 3535. So, but to back up, I think that's an important question that you're asking, right? Now, IETF doesn't define protocols or specifications in vacuum.
Yeah.
The idea is we need to understand the issues that are at hand, that people are facing today, right? So, yes, back in 2002, the IAB met with the operators to gather their requirements. They came up with some 14 requirements that the operators talked about, documented it as part of RFC 3535. And those requirements resulted in protocol specifications such as netconf, restconf, and coreconf, the last one for constrained devices. And, of course, the language Yang, the data modeling language to model these devices. 20 years hence, we are back asking the question, what next, right? What are network operators looking for now from an automation perspective, the attendees of these conference, the AutoCon in specific? Do you need operational experience in the form of best current practice, BCPs that you talked about? Do you want to run experiments on service deployment? Or in the world of AI, are you looking for ways to collect and normalize data? Are you looking for LLMs to be able to make sense of this data set that you're collecting? Are you looking for tools or libraries that we just talked about that people need? In other words, the question I want to ask here is, how can IETF help network operators automate their network?
So let's define operators for a second here, because there's a lot of different, I would say, classes of network that have operators. You've got service providers operating a massive global network, and they have some unique requirements. You've got cloud service providers that have their own networks with some very different requirements from what the service providers are. And then, of course, enterprises right down to small little shops, SMBs, with just a single campus or even a single building.
Yes.
So what kind of network operators, who provides input that's valuable to the IETF? Do the little guys matter as much as the big guys? Because everybody's got different perspectives and needs.
Yes. And you're right to point out that when I talk about network operators, I should be specific enough to say actually all of them. In 2002, it was the service providers that we were talking to. But we clearly, 20 years hence, we're looking at a network which consists, as you said, of SMBs with maybe one or two network operators. We're looking at large data centers that have a completely unique set of requirements. Again, separate from enterprises, which is very different from operators. But that's not to say that there is not commonality between those. There is quite a bit of commonality, and then there are the unique pieces that we do need to understand.
The smaller networks tend to be a bit messier and more complicated. The larger networks, the larger the networks they are, probably the simpler they are, even though they're huge. And then there is a lot of functional overlap between them, for sure. Yeah,
exactly. And I think part of the pain that I hear from people out here is, I'm a single person.
Yeah.
Right? And what can I do by myself? And that's why I talked about tools and libraries, is because how do you enable one single network operator to be able to automate their network? Whereas an ISP might have 100 people sitting to automate the network, right?
And are motivated to pay developers to build tooling for them internally, because the network is the product. That's the thing they make their money on. And so it behooves them to dig in deep with automation and bring a service to life in an automated way. They can monetize things more quickly.
Yeah,
sure.
Whereas an enterprise, their product might be something completely different, and they're just using network as a way to sell their product, right?
Yes.
So network is not their...
It's not the product.
It's not the product.
It's a business facilitator. Yeah.
Exactly.
So operators are everybody. You're looking for input from anybody and everybody, all different perspectives. NMOP is interested in hearing from everybody. So whoever's listening to this shouldn't think, NMOP doesn't want to hear from me, we're too small. No, they're interested.
No, yeah, exactly. We want input from the whole gamut of operators.
All right, so I want to dig into data models for a minute here. This has become a favorite topic of mine because it's complicated. What's really happened, there's really an industry-wide challenge among network automation practitioners around data models. So OpenConfig, for example, not specific enough for many folks. There's a good baseline of commonality there, but doesn't get as specific as a lot of folks want. On the other hand, you've got vendors with their own kind of one-off models, and those will surface up these unique product capabilities. So if you want to be able to access those programmatically, you can use the vendor's data model. Then there's all the IETF Yang data models that you talked about, tons of them that are out there. I think you've authored some of them yourself. I've seen your name attached to some of the data models. RFC 9314 Yang model for BFD, RFC 8519 Yang model for network ACLs, and some other ones that have your name attached. So I mean, you know this topic intimately. Here's my question, Mahesh. What is going on with models that network operators, despite all of these different models that already exist, they're making their own data models because they can't find what they need readily accessible?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. It is truly an unfortunate situation where we are really with these sort of data models. Because there is no one set that operators can deploy today that covers every aspect of their network. You're right to point out that OpenConfig was probably the first one to come out with their set of models, but they were not feature complete for most of the operators that wanted to deploy the solution.
It was feature complete for those in that world, kind of OCP, large-scale operators with fairly well-defined needs. It was good for them, but not good for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So the set of people that developed OpenConfig had an idea of how they wanted their network to operate, and they developed the models according to that. And it works great for them, but it doesn't completely cover the entire industry. On the other hand, you have IETF, that has been developing models for the longest time and is still not done with publishing all its models.
I assume it's still the same today, but for a long time it's been, there's an RFC, it gets published, there's a Yang model that goes along with it. Yeah.
That is, yes, still very much the process by which we publish models. And if you find a bug or an issue with it, guess what? You're back at the drawing table. You're publishing a biz document, you're making changes, and you're getting approvals. It's at least a 2 to 3 year process just to make a change. Sometimes more.
That is not rapid iteration.
That's not rapid. It doesn't bode well when you're trying to get something out quickly.
So you're highlighting another challenge then. Yeah, okay.
Right? And to compound the situation, the two ecosystems are not compatible.
Which two ecosystems? You mean
the
OpenConfig
and the IETF models? Okay. Meaning if you adopt one set of models, you can't quite mix and match the other missing pieces into that.
Right. It's not as if OpenConfig is a subset of IETF models. They are in fact different models.
They are, and they're written differently in a way that makes it difficult for someone to say, okay, I don't have OpenConfig defining this particular piece of my network, so I'm going to take this IETF model and somehow mix the two. Sorry, you can't quite do that. So what does the industry do? Well, it does do what it does best under such a situation, which is basically adapt. So take Arcus as an example, right? So when we were formed in 2016, we looked at the landscape of models. And we said we want to be the model-first company, meaning everything, including our CLI and all our interfaces out of the box, will be model-based, right?
As in what's rendered on the CLI came from a model.
Comes from a model. Even today, it comes from a model. So we took the base set of OpenConfig models that were available at that point and said, okay, what are we missing? And whatever we were missing, we started to augment the OpenConfig model to add in the features and the asks that our customers were asking of us.
OpenConfig Plus, if you will.
OpenConfig. Yeah. To a point that today we have Arcus-specific Yang models that eclipse the base set of OpenConfig models. I mean, we do have the OpenConfig.
But it started with OpenConfig, so there's still commonality there, or are they, as the structures become so different, they're no longer compatible?
No, we still use them.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah.
Except that to fill in the gaps, we had to augment them in ways that makes it vendor-specific. So now that creates a headache for an operator that is trying to deploy devices from multiple vendors.
But if I'm an Arcus shop running Arc OS and so on, I've got a set of models that I can use to take the full advantage of what your platform offers. Yeah,
exactly. So if you take an Arcus box and you deploy them all the way from the core to the edge, you will have a solution that covers the entire gamut of features in the network. The problem comes is if you want to say, well, I want a second vendor of choice. And now the operator has a problem because he's used to a certain set of APIs that they have developed for a particular vendor. But those set of APIs don't necessarily work with the device from another.
So I was using the Arcus models, and now I've added, Arista into my network or Cisco, and those models don't apply anymore. So what am I going to do as the operator? I'm probably going to build my own model and an abstraction layer that can take my model and run it through the abstraction to make it work for Arcus, make it work for whatever my other vendor is. And
so what you then tend to do is exactly as you said, which is create an abstraction layer that abstracts out the vendor-specific differences. And now you're interfacing with that one particular model to try to get to the solution.
It's SNMP all over again, right? The biggest part of the MIB was you'd tuck into the private enterprise MIB, and then you find all the unusual and vendor proprietary stuff that had the interesting, really cool features that you wanted to pull in. We're there all over again.
Yeah. So that's exactly the problem we are faced with today. Yeah. It really doesn't help to move the needle forward.
Does it get fixed? Or is it too late? It feels like it's too late.
It does, but I'm a hopeful person. I still hope that sane minds will come to bear, that maybe one day we'll actually sit down and say, there are these set of models that work for everyone that's used them.
Well, let's bring it back to NMOP. Is NMOP going to have some kind of an impact on data models, do you think?
Yeah, so the best thing that NMOP, under the circumstances, can do is to validate what it has at hand, which is the given set of standard models. So in other words, what NMOP is trying to do is create what is called a Yang package or a Yang suite. which is a set of models that work together and offer a particular solution for the customer. To do this...
offer a solution. So as in, I'm trying to roll out a particular service. If I use all of these models to roll out whatever that service looks like, these should all work together and be everything I need.
Yeah. So take an example that a service provider wants to deploy a solution where they want to have point-to-point connectivity.
Sure.
Right. An EPL service, Ethernet point line service. And so they need to know, okay, what sort of models can I use today out of the box that I know will work together for me to be able to deploy that service. So NMOP would say, okay, I have these set of packages that I have developed that validate a given set of models that can do or perform that particular service configuration for you.
Yeah.
Right. Now, to do this, of course, what NMOP is going to have to do is, and it is doing, is taking the standard Yang models and figuring out the interoperability issues between the models themselves to make sure that they are fixing them, or at least take it to the right working group to make sure that they fix them in a way that they do interoperate.
Complicated. There's a lot of detail in there.
Yes, there is. And the example that you gave of some of the drafts that I worked on, when I was working on the BGP Yang model, for example, we realized that we actually needed to interact with the BFT model, which we had already published, and realized that we actually made a mistake. So we had to go and revise the BFT Yang model for that operational interoperability issue. So those are the kind of things that NMOP is tasked to do with.
So, okay, that's a lot of work. Okay,
it is.
I can see that. But NMOP isn't just working on data models. You're also working on management protocols, as I understand it. So why don't you talk through some of the protocols NMOP's going to be evaluating and concerns around them?
Right, sure. NMOP is actually working on more than, as you said, the data models. So it's looking at netconf and Yang push integration with message buses or message brokers like Apache Kafka, or with time series database such as InfluxDB or Prometheus. So the concern, however, is around, okay, fine, you have somehow managed to collect and normalize all this data. But there's this whole incident management Yang model that needs to be able to understand and normalize that particular data, right? Once you are able to normalize things such as in that incident database that you've stored in the database, you can employ methods to identify anomaly detection or do actual incident management. So it's NMOP is certainly doing that. The other work that NMOP is looking at is the usage of Yang topology modules, both physical and logical models. And topology, not just from the physical or logical perspective, but also maybe from a routing perspective, to see what is the best path forward given the network.
So this would be representing, well, let's start at the physical layer. This would be like representing a network topology as a model. So you could describe, like, my network has all these different routing connections and links and speeds and whatever.
I have layer 2, I have layer 3, I have this IGP running here, and I have this eBGP running here.
And in theory, if I describe them as a model and some software could ingest that model, it could create a demonstration of what that looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you overlay routing on top of it or RSVP on it, and you say, okay, what is the best path forward for me given this topology?
So this feels like it would lean into digital twin kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was going to talk a little bit about it, since maybe if you want to talk about what's some of the work that's going on in NMOP from a draft or work perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to that. Yeah, it sounds like so if IETF is going to get into how do I build a digital twin, that would come out as a draft?
Yeah. So Actually, and that's one of the more interesting work. But let me get to that. So I think we talked a couple of things. We talked about the architecture work that NMOP is doing with regard to Yang push and
NetConf
and message broker integration.
Message brokers, yeah.
We talked about network incident management to make sure that there's a standard way to report, diagnose, and resolve network incidents. And then to the digital twin question, or the digital map question, actually, that you were asking. So there is a draft on the digital map, which is based on the topology Yang model.
Okay. You get a subtle difference between digital twin and digital map. Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Got it.
So the digital twin, which is a virtualized instance of the topology.
Something that actually models your actual network. So more like network operating systems are there, and you can move traffic through it and all. The digital map is more like, I don't know, the model, but without the operating system overlay on top.
Yeah, and more so also from a usability perspective, you can think of, I take the topology as it exists today and create a twin out of it. And then I can go and play with it and see, hey, if I was to model the topology slightly differently, how would the network behave?
Right, yes.
So that's, to me, is really the exciting work of the digital map and digital twin that we
it's interesting for capacity planning, for the cost optimization. There's a lot of interesting use cases there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can cover a whole gamut of planning issues that you might not have been able to do before.
Yeah. So. Or use it potentially as a test bed as part of your pipeline for delivering a network change. You can run it through the digital twin and validate that a proposed change has the intended effect. And if it passes that test, then maybe you move it down the pipeline to the next step of pushing it to production. Yeah.
Right. This is, and that's where, being able to create that model, creating a virtual instance of that allows you to do those exercises, which probably you couldn't do with an actual production network.
And people are doing it as best as they can. There's 5 different ways, 10 different ways that you could do it. You could invest in a commercial product that will build a digital twin for you and then run tests through that, or you're going to mock it up in some way in Container Lab and build out your network topology close enough as you can in Container Lab and run tests that way and see how that goes. And because there's different ways people are tackling it. There's no one way, and some of them are bounded by cost. That's a challenge, of course. And it sounds like what you're talking here gives us yet another way to tackle the problem.
Right. And as you said, you might have commercial products already coming out or talking about this digital map and digital twin. All we're saying is, yes, here's a technology. We can, in NMOP, can talk about how we see it being used.
Yeah. So this is translating into drafts then?
Yes. So if you go to the charter for NMOP, you will see a draft that is looking at digital map.
Okay. What other drafts are coming out of NMOP?
So we talked, of course, about the architecture document for Yang push. We talked about incident management and, of course, the digital map. But really, if you want to see exactly not just the work that has been adopted by NMOP, but also what's being proposed as a draft and as an individual draft, the best place, the source for all this is, of course, the data tracker website at IETF, right? So if you go to datatracker.ietf.org/WG/NMOP, it'll list out to you not only what is the charter for NMOP, what it is tasked to work with, but you will see both the adopted set of documents that the work group is already working on, but you can also see individual drafts that people have proposed to NMOP.
And this is key here, because people who are outside of the IETF, they don't really engage and are wondering how they could engage. This is where you're taking us. How do I, as an operator, engage with the IETF? You can get into Data Tracker. If you don't remember the whole URL that Mahesh just shared, you just search for NMOP, drafts, IETF, it'll come up. That's the page that comes up. It drops you right into the working group page and starts showing everything that's there is well organized and easy to read.
Exactly.
those drafts that are published, again, these are literally drafts. They are works in progress, and that anyone in the community has the ability to get on the mailing list for that working group and make comments about, right?
Right. So the difference is between an individual draft and a workgroup document, which I did want to highlight, was that an individual draft is just that. It is a proposal on part of an individual to say, hey, workgroup, you might be interested in this work that I want to propose. And as part of that, as an individual draft, or even as a workgroup document, as you said, people can join the mailing list of the working group and say, I like this part of the document, but I would really like some clarification on this piece of the specification, or maybe we want, how about this as an alternate solution for what you're trying to propose. And that work happens on the workgroup document, meaning the document is owned by the working group. That means everyone who is part of the working group owns that document. So anyone can propose a change, and if there's consensus, rough consensus, as we say, then it will be adopted by the working group as part of the specification. So
now, I don't have to have a special invitation from the IETF to participate. I literally can sign up for the mailing list and
absolutely.
engage.
Yeah. So all our mailing lists are public. Anyone can subscribe to it. For the NMOP working group, go to subscribe to NMOP at IETF.org. Mm-hmm. And not only can you see and participate in the discussion as it is happening, but we have archives of all our emails. So you can go back and actually see the whole history of discussion if you want to pick up on a particular topic.
How busy are the mailing lists?
Let's put it that way. If you start reading every email that came across, you would be spending the whole day just reading emails. No, I'm just half kidding. You do want to subscribe to certain mailing lists that you are particularly interested in.
In my experience, I've been on a few just to kind of get a sense of it. I haven't really participated actively, but I've just kind of read what's going on. The volume is from nothing to a few messages a day typically. It's not high volume.
No, it isn't. I mean, this is people, techies talking techie stuff, and so it does take a bit to write an email that makes sense and is worthwhile discussing. So obviously, these are mails that are meant for a particular purpose, which is to define and discuss a specification. But even outside of IETF website, we do have a channel on YouTube that you can go and view all the previous meetings of IETFs, including NMOPs. So if you never attended or missed a certain meeting, you can go to the YouTube channel and actually watch the entire meeting in progress.
They're not the most scintillating things you've ever seen. I will say that, having attended some of those person. But it's one of those where if you're interested, you're interested. That is, if the topic is important to you as an operator, you'll attending those meetings, you pick up a lot. You figure out where people are coming from, different folks coming from certain corporate points of view because of who their employer is and the reason they want X to be involved in a draft or a standard and so on. You can learn a lot.
Right. And I tell people that the best way to get involved if you're really interested in the topic, and I'm sure topics like the Green Initiative, we can talk about that, are of interest to people. So the best way is for you to subscribe to the mailing list, or if you don't want to subscribe but just read, you can go to the archives and read the entire discussion. But really, to get involved, I tell people, write a draft, because writing a draft tells you a lot more about what it takes to write a specification.
My friend Russ White has tried to drag me into helping him write a draft on something a few different times. I've never quite. It was hard enough trying to write a book with that man, let alone trying to get into an RFC draft.
Oh, well, you could write an RFC on how to run a podcast. So absolutely, it's never too early to start writing a RFC specification.
Oh boy. So at this point, NMOP is pretty new. There's a working group. There's a bunch of folks that are established, and it sounds like if you want to get in on this, you're pretty close to the ground floor. I mean, it's only a few months old as of this discussion we're having.
Yeah, and I would say that especially attendees of this particular conference or the con, we would really love to have their participation. And as we discussed, you don't have to be physically there, although it'll be great if you're there to meet people in person. But you can start by participating over email and tell us. And
you can participate in the live IETF meetings remotely. I know I've attended that. There's people, they're up on the big screen and they're in via Zoom, or I don't know what the mechanism is.
Yeah, there is. We have our own tool called Meet Echo that we use. But actually, thank you for bringing that up, because I keep forgetting that there is this other virtual way that we adopted during COVID that we still carry on to use, because, I mean, it's not physically possible for everyone to be there at every meeting. So we do offer that option of remote participation.
Okay. Well, Mahesh, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time, refreshing all our memories on how the IETF works and the work that you guys are doing. Very much appreciated. And if people want to interact with you, LinkedIn, how can people find you?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is, of course, through LinkedIn. But if you go to the IETF website and look for area director, you will find me there. Okay. And do get in touch. Tell me what your interests are. Certainly would be happy to connect you with the right people.
Okay, so we'll have all those links in the show notes at packetpushers.net, including a link to some other presentations related to this topic, and a link to a blog post by Claes Benoit, who has always been big on models for a long time and talked quite a bit about NMOP and introduced it. In fact, that's how NMOP came up on my radar. And if you've listened all the way to the end, hey, thank you very much for listening to Heavy Networking today. You are a most excellent human. I've been Ethan Banks, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn or the Packet Pushers Community Slack group. And the world of Packet Pushers is filled with excellent IT engineering information available freely and privately to you. You never have to give us your details to access anything we publish. I mean, unless you want us to send you a newsletter, right? Then we kind of need to know your email address. That's how that works. But all of our podcasts, blogs, newsletters, and videos are free and ungated. Again, no login required. Just go find what you want and consume it. One way to do that is to visit packetpushers.net. Another way is to search in your podcast software for Packet Pushers to see our entire lineup of shows, including Day 2 DevOps, Heavy Wireless, Packet Protector, that's the security-focused show. You see what we did there. Network Break for your weekly dose of industry news and analysis, network automation nerds, and more. Yes, really, there's more. Everyone says, and more, but there really is more. We have even more podcasts than what I just mentioned. So many deeply knowledgeable hosts on our network with things to share. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.